till there's to grow up and out of it.
What are the party's plans for education?
All the issues, all the angles, the general election.
All on the BBC.
Now on BBC One, the news with Fiona Bruce and Matt Barbette.
The end of the road for MG Rover. All efforts to save it end in failure. 5,000 workers will lose their jobs. 12,000 in subsidiary companies will be affected. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown rushed to Birmingham to announce an emergency support package. We'll be assessing where it all went wrong for Rover and whether it ever could have been saved. Also tonight, Michael Howard campaigns for tougher controls on immigration. He says the system is in chaos. 20 people are killed, including 10 children, in a fire in a Paris hotel. Does the Catholic Church prepares to choose a new leader? The view from the world's largest Catholic country.
In BBC London News, left behind, the Nazi concentration camp survivors not invited to commemorate Belson's liberation. And who's more family-friendly, the main party's campaign on childcare.
Good evening. All hopes of saving the car company MG Rover have collapsed. More than 5,000 workers are to be made redundant, and the 100-year-old firm at Longbridge in Birmingham will be mostly mothballed. The administrator said today that all efforts to broker a deal with the Shanghai automotive company had failed, and the Chinese no longer wanted to buy any part of MG Rover. As well as those receiving redundancy notices this weekend, an additional 12,500 jobs in subsidiary industries could be affected. The government's announced a £150 million support package to help workers retrain or find other jobs. Our business correspondent, Rory Kethlen-Jones, is in Longbridge. Rory.
Fiona, last Friday when the administrators arrived here, the prospects for Rover and its workforce already looked very poor. But the unions and the government clung on to the hope that Shanghai Automotive might still come riding to the rescue. Well, this morning that final hope was extinguished. They'd known it was coming for a long time, but that didn't make the end for Rover workers any less shocking. By mid-morning, they were leaving Longbridge with their possessions, all too aware that they needed to look for new work.
Desperately need help, don't we now?
Yeah.
I mean, if we're not going to get paid next week, that's when it all starts, don't it? I mean, how are we going to pay our bills?
I mean, I'm 52 now. All I've done is this. The last 15 years. I'm too old to retrain.
Earlier this week, they'd been told by their union there was only a 1 in a million chance of saving Rover. This morning, even that evaporated. The administrators revealed that the Chinese firm SIAC had ruled out any rescue deal. That in turn meant no more cash from the government, making mass redundancies inevitable.
As regards the employees and their families, obviously this is completely devastating news for them. There was some hope as regards the SIAC situation. And that hope, of course, has gone on for a long, long period of time prior to the administration. With this certainty, we felt that we had no alternative to take the decisions that we've taken and communicate them as quickly as possible to the employees.
This production line, silent for a week now, won't be moving again. For the union leader who's fought twice to save Longbridge, it's a bitter moment.
I think it is quite literally the darkest day ever in the history of the British car industry, and for many thousands of our people now they face a bleak prospect of being on the dole.
For 5 years, John Towers and his Phoenix consortium have been insisting there's a brighter future ahead for the company they bought from BMW. They're now setting up a trust fund for Rover workers.
We feel completely devastated. I have to say that our feelings are nothing compared to the feelings of the thousands of people who were employed here and their families.
Around the corner from Longbridge, one of Mr. Towers' redundant workers was absorbing today's news. Jerry Mann, a design engineer, believes Rover was always facing long odds.
The first few months everybody was, full of the new company and let's all try this and we'll all do that. But I think when the penny sank in, we realised that we were in a deep hole. and it was a big climb to come out of it, and we never managed it.
The impact is being felt far beyond Longbridge. Rover dealers have already paid for stocks of cars, now sinking in value by the day.
There's a big dealer network out there that have been selling Rover and representing the brand as we have been for 20-odd years. So it's a big blow, really, to everyone associated with Rover.
Inside the sprawling Rover complex, a glimpse of some of the last vehicles ever to be built here. After a century of car making at Longbridge, a chapter of Britain's industrial history has come to an end. Well, over the weekend, those redundancy notices will be going out to 5,000 workers. 1,000 will be kept on just to help with the process, really, of running the company down. From now on, the administrator's job will really be to break the company up and see if anybody's willing to pay anything for the parts. Fiona.
Rory, thanks very much. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, announcing an aid package for Rover workers and suppliers, said this was a desperate time for the Longbridge families. And the timing of the collapse could be awkward for the government at this stage of the election campaign. Our chief political correspondent, Mark Mardell, reports.
For the second time in 7 days, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister cancelled their plans and rushed to the Midlands to handle this crisis. A grim duty, all the grimmer in the middle of a general election where they're trumpeting economic success and stability.
There's no point in me trying to pretend that we can put together some magic deal to get another company to come in and take it over. If we could do it, believe me, we would have done it. We weren't able to do that. What we can do now is do our level best for people for the future and to protect them through a period that's going to be very, very anxious and very, very worrying.
This is how the £150 million will be spent. 40 million to cover redundancy payments, 50 million to retrain redundant workers from Rover and its suppliers, and 60 million to help industry in the area diversify. As the shock sinks in, not many here are thinking about the election. The three biggest parties have suspended campaigning. Locally, at least, opposition parties are treating it more like a natural disaster than a political opportunity. Labour believes the West Midlands economy is strong and hope the end of Rover is seen as an isolated case. But Michael Howard, meeting veterans in Kent, says what he calls a dreadful, terrible blow does tell a bigger story.
We've lost 1 million manufacturing jobs since Mr Blair came to office. In fact, in the last 4 years of the Conservative government, before that, we gained 200,000 manufacturing jobs. And the burdens of red tape and regulation and tax, which this government have imposed on British business, make it that much more difficult for them to win orders and create jobs.
Charles Kennedy, all at sea today in the nicest possible way, wants answers.
There will have to be a proper inquiry into the whole background as to how this situation sunk the way in which it did, the government's role, but also, of course, the director's role.
There are 7 marginal Labour seats around and about Longbridge. The party will be waiting nervously to see if voters blame them for the closure. It's a political rule of thumb that when the economy takes a knock, so does the government. But while the main opposition parties may have many questions about how Rover got into this hole, they don't have any radically different prescriptions to get it out. Mark Mardell, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, it's 5 years since the British-owned Phoenix Group bought MG Rover from BMW. Then the government and unions backed the Phoenix bid over an alternative offer as the best way of reviving the company and saving jobs. Our business correspondent Hugh Pym examines Phoenix's controversial record.
The Longbridge car plant has seen many ups and downs in recent history. 5 years ago, the future looked bleak when the owner BMW decided to pull out. The businessman, John Moulton, running a company called Alchemy, made a bid for the MG business, but there'd have been thousands of redundancies on the Rover side. He was vilified by unions. The then Trade Secretary Stephen Byers backed a takeover by a consortium of local businessmen. The Phoenix Group, led by John Towers, promised to keep the whole of MG Rover going. But with hindsight, was this the right option to take? The former Conservative Trade Secretary Lord Young privatised MG Rover in the late 1980s. He argues Alchemy was the only realistic bet.
They had a clear vision. MG was the part that should continue, and Rover, as a mass car manufacturer, really couldn't. And if the government had accepted that offer, each of those redundant Rover workers would have gone away with £50,000.
But the union which backed Phoenix has a different perspective.
The Alchemy deal was a mirage. It collapsed. There was no alternative. What we did then was to save tens of thousands of workers.
But questions are being asked about Mr. Towers and his colleagues. One analysis has looked at money coming in and going out of the Phoenix companies. They inherited about £380 million worth of unsold cars, and the businesses they took on brought in £180 million worth of cash. BMW lent £427 million interest-free. About £260 million came in from asset sales and other deals. That's a total of £1.25 billion. But on one estimate, only £900 million was needed to cover trading losses. MG Rover said there were no discrepancies and gave a robust response to critics of their accounting practices.
We got to the point where we said yesterday that we weren't prepared to actually put any more energy into responding to these nonsense issues.
From workforce representatives, there have been calls for assets to be frozen while official inquiries are carried out. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Our business editor, Jeff Randall, is with me now. Well, Jeff, the administrators are now going to be picking over the accounts at MG Rover. What questions are they going to be asking?
Well, let's be clear, Fiona. This is a company with a very complex structure. The accounts are opaque, to say the least, and it's not going to be easy for those administrators to find out what's gone where. But if the administrators are going to establish any value in the company, they will want to know where the assets are, where they've gone. Now, we know because Hugh reported there that the cash has gone, the land has been sold off, the car parts business has been sold off, and also the car finance business. But what about the MG brand? We thought there was some value in that, but is that still within the Rover Group? We don't know. Has it been hived off to another part of the Phoenix Empire? The administrators will want to know the answers to these questions.
And what are we looking at here? Are we looking at poor management or other issues as well?
Well, it's easy for us to say it was poor management, and perhaps it was, but let's be realistic. The car industry is blighted with overcapacity. That means there are simply too many cars being made. And big car companies all over the world, Ford, Nissan in Japan, General Motors, they've all had tough times and made big losses. And I think what Rover proves is you cannot be a small mass market car producer. You need scale, you need funding, and you need products. Certainly products that people want to buy, and I'm afraid Rover had none of those.
OK, Jeff, thanks very much. Michael Howard continued his tour of Conservative target seats today, with immigration again a focus of his campaigning. But he also accused Tony Blair of failing to protect the postal voting system from potential fraud. Our political editor Andrew Marr spent the day with Mr Howard.
Michael Howard hits Watford. It's a classic marginal. Win here and generally you win the election too. Labour supporters have turned up as well and, yep, it gets a bit lively.
Stop talking at your backside.
Calm down, that's a job. And not in front of the cameras, please. Oops. But the main point of this visit was to answer taunts that Michael Howard is leading a xenophobic election campaign. Look at the faces of the supporters behind him. Not that this means the Tories are suddenly pulling back from the immigration issue.
We all recognise that there are literally millions of people from poorer countries who would like to settle here, and that Britain just can't take them all. We are a small and densely populated island.
It's about fairness and rules, he said, only that. And the Conservatives are fielding more candidates from ethnic minorities than either Labour or the Liberal Democrats. All the parties report that immigration and asylum are playing big on the doorstep. But so far, in constituencies like Chatham in Kent, there's little visible enthusiasm for anyone. I asked Mr Howard if he felt that so far there'd been very little movement between the parties.
I think that's true to some extent. Some things are moving. I think our morale is high and we're working hard, getting a very positive response on the doorstep. And on the other hand, I think there are a lot of people who are deserting the Labour Party.
And Mr Howard's most ferocious attack on Labour today came on the issue of soaring postal vote applications and his fear of widespread electoral fraud.
People will remember the sort of rather superior kind of fun we had 4 years ago when talking about hanging Chads in Florida. Nobody ever thought that our electoral system would become suspect. What happens to our credentials? when we want to complain about things that happened in Zimbabwe, which is a very good example, we all feel a sense of outrage at what happened there. What credentials do we have to criticise countries like that if our own electoral system is described by a High Court judge as having degenerated into a system more suited to a banana republic?
The Tories are also gathering up huge numbers of postal votes, but say they have no choice.
It is the fault of the government. The Electoral Commission made recommendations which, if they'd been accepted, could have avoided all this. And the government rejected those recommendations. And we've seen in Birmingham the Labour Party engaged in a citywide conspiracy to steal elections. It's an appalling state of affairs.
Michael Howard went on to visit the site of a new Sikh temple in Gravesham, another classic marginal constituency, and it's in marginals across the country where applications for postal votes have rocketed. All parties are gathering them, all want more of us to vote. But the Electoral Commission is worried about how simple fraud has turned out to be. Mr. Howard's startlingly outspoken warning to the BBC will ensure that this issue continues to stay alive until election day, and perhaps well beyond it. Andrew Marr, BBC News, with the Conservative election campaign.
Andrew Marr's returned to London tonight. He's in Westminster now. Andrew, strong words we heard there from Michael Howard about potential fraud in postal voting. What's the government's response been?
Well, the government's view is that rather than being alarming, this is just alarmist, that all the parties are behaving in a similar way. They've all checked with the Electoral Commission, and that a few incidents, however regrettable, in Birmingham during the local elections shouldn't blow apart something that is designed to greatly increase the number of people voting at this general election or who would otherwise have voted. The trouble is we won't know until after the election. I certainly have never heard the leader of a main British political party use language like this about our electoral system.
Well, Andrew, here we are. It's the end of the first week of campaigning. How have the parties fared?
Well, the truth of the matter is we have had a huge amount of sound and fury, really big stories ranging from Rover on the one side to the asylum seeker who murdered the policeman, all the publicity around of that on the other, Charles Kennedy's baby, arguments about whether or not different parties could afford their public spending plans, the manifesto launches. And out there in the country, there is no evidence that opinion has really moved by a pip or a whisker, frankly. The opinion polls have possibly hardened a little bit in Labour's favour, but it's very, very small. And I think there's general frustration that there's no sense of momentum in any direction. It may simply be that for all the drama, for all the vivid colour and the exchange of views around Westminster, the country has noticed but not yet focused on what's going on.
OK, Andrew, thanks very much. Still to come on tonight's programme, the Paralympian Tanni Grey-Thompson on what's important to her in this election.
It just makes complete sense to me that sport and physical activity has a really high priority on any government's agenda.
At least 20 people, 10 of them children, are now known to have died in a fire at a Paris hotel. Flames swept through the building, which is used by social services to house mainly immigrant families. Emma Jane Kirby reports.
Panic as flames soar through the rooftops. A mother screams to firefighters to save her child's life. Others begged, waving frantically from top-floor windows, but so very few could be reached. The fire engulfed the staircase, quickly cutting off the only exit. Desperate, many guests jumped to their deaths.
It's impossible at the moment to determine what caused this terrible tragedy, but the hotel had a wooden staircase, so we can imagine an accident having dreadful consequences.
20 people lost their half of them children. Yet just 3 weeks before, the hotel had passed a rigorous safety standards test. The owner's daughter claimed safety had been their prime concern. All the hotel guests had been briefed about emergency procedures. A small group of protesters gathered in the street outside, demanding a full investigation. This was one of 500 or so budget hotels that Paris authorities used to house immigrants and asylum seekers. Now political parties from across the board are calling for the French social housing system to be revamped. There was no gentle way to break the bad news to relatives. The Red Cross set up tents to provide a makeshift counselling service. With more than 50 people still in hospital, this was the worst fire Paris has seen in 20 years. The authorities promise a full investigation. Little comfort, though, for the grieving families. Emma Jane Kirby, BBC News, Paris.
Dignitaries from 60 countries have attended the funeral service of Prince Rainier of Monaco, who died last week. Rainier ruled the principality for 56 years. The mourners were led by his son, Prince Albert, who now succeeds him as head of the Grimaldi dynasty. Prince Rainier has been interred next to his wife, the former actress Grace Kelly, in Monaco's cathedral crypt. On Monday, 115 cardinals will enter the secret conclave in Rome to begin the process of electing a new pope. One cardinal widely tipped as a successor to Pope John Paul II is Claudio Humes, the Archbishop of São Paulo in Brazil. His is the largest Roman Catholic diocese in the world's most populous Roman Catholic country. Our correspondent Matt Fry has been to Brazil to look at the challenges facing a new pope.
The cathedral is as daunting as the diocese it represents. São Paulo, the world's biggest, home to 7 million Catholic souls, and to a man who they pray will become the next pontiff. Cardinal Claudio Humes, a 70-year-old Franciscan, he was appointed by the late Pope, who hailed him as a champion of the poor and a staunch conservative. But in the mysteries of the conclave, nationality also counts. Brazil has statistics on its side. In Rio, Christ the Redeemer famously peers down on the world's biggest Catholic country. But redemption is hard to come by in a city whose ills have mushroomed. This is the favela of Dona Marta, a slum by an elegant name, where the sewers are open and the electricity is stolen from the apartment block next door.
And somebody comes and cuts the electricity all off.
They call him the Pope of Dona Marta. Without Father Lysing, there'd be no schools here and no church. After 5 decades on the front line against poverty, he also believes that the edicts from Rome are a luxury they cannot afford.
Are they good Catholics or bad Catholics, or don't these labels even apply here?
They don't apply. I think they're people of God. That's the most important thing. They believe in God, and they want to really go to heaven. They all believe in heaven.
They live in hell.
They live in hell, yeah.
In a hovel on an alley that has no name lives Danusa, unemployed mother of 3. As she showed me, this is as good as it gets here. A home made from breeze blocks. Plaster is still a distant luxury, but the walls speak volumes about her faith.
It doesn't matter how bad your financial situation is. If God gives you 2, 3, or even 5 or 6 children, that's okay. My mother had 10 children.
It was off camera that Danusa told us what she really thought. Contraception was okay, and in very rare cases, even abortion. Wealth, of course, also produces compromises, but with fewer inhibitions. On the blessed beach at Ipanema, we met Conrad and Amanda. They go to Catholic University and to Mass. Theo is their son, but not being married is a sin they can live with, even if the church cannot.
If you have good education, you are allowed to question the dogmas, you are allowed to look at things more reasonably. You don't just accept what is thrown at you.
And do you think that the Catholic Church has been throwing the right stuff or the wrong stuff at people like you?
The wrong stuff.
From poverty to apathy, the Catholic Church and the world's most Catholic country faces a multitude of challenges, especially from the rising evangelical churches who seem to be capturing the imagination of the poor here. A Brazilian pope might make all the difference, but then cardinals from Africa, Asia and Europe also have their pressing issues. Matt Fry, BBC News, Rio de Janeiro.
The leader of the Scottish National Party, Alex Salmond, has launched his party's manifesto, promising to put Scotland first. The party would set a 4% growth target to boost Scotland's national income. They'd create 200,000 extra jobs and develop an apprenticeship system. Pensions would be increased with an end to means testing, and there'd be more support for families, including 50% more nursery provision. Brian Taylor reports.
Hello there. This is Sean Connery. No, it's not a joke. I'm calling you on behalf of the Scottish National Party.
Celebrity support in a message played to 500,000 homes. But the manifesto is more hard-headed politics than sentiment. They want to cut business taxation to boost the economy and reverse Scotland's population decline. They're broadly pro-Europe and anti-nuclear. But how many seats will that win?
I'm betting between 6 and 59, Brian.
Here's a tip. It'll be closer to 6. Another ship off the slips at Govan on the Clyde. Nationalists claim the yard was only saved because Westminster feared an SNP revival. Now they say Scottish Army regiments can be saved by the same pressure.
I think the London parties will be paralysed with fear as they see the SNP vote move ahead.
Tough talk, but the Nationalists are out scrabbling for every vote, dismissing claims that their message is meaningless in a UK contest.
As long as Westminster retains control over key areas of Scottish life, like the economy, like big issues of war and peace, then we must have strong voices fighting Scotland's corner in the House of Commons.
But are the SNP playing on the field of glory or the field of dreams? Their rivals say that nationalist politics are irrelevant at Westminster, particularly since the advent of a Scottish Parliament. But the SNP see this as a crucial semi-final, a staging post on the road to victory in that Scottish Parliament and, they hope, eventual independence. Brian Taylor, BBC News, at the National Stadium in Glasgow.
The leader of the UK Independence Party, Roger Natman, says he's confident the party is on course to have its first Westminster MPs. Launching UKIP's manifesto, he said unless Britain withdraws from the European Union, immigration couldn't be brought under control. Jonathan Beale reports.
The UK Independence Party's campaign is still rolling along, but it's been slowed down by splits, and its ambitions for this election are modest.
I'm standing here in the general election, and I'm saying to people, we can't form a government, but we can win seats like this.
Though UKIP's putting up 500 candidates, it's focusing efforts on just a handful of seats. Still, the party believes it has a potent message.
I think we should run our own country.
Withdrawal from the European Union remains the theme of its new manifesto. UKIP says all other policies are dependent on that.
Obviously, you can achieve very little unless we govern ourselves, unless we regain our independence. So as policies go for the general election, that's the hub of the wheel. Unless you achieve independence, the other manifestos are worth nothing.
UKIP says leaving the European Union will save Britain £12 billion a year. It believes withdrawal's the only way Britain can restrict immigration and bring its borders under control. The party will use the savings made to raise the basic state pension by £25 a week. UKIP tasted success in last year's European elections, but the euphoria turned to bitter infighting and the exit of its best-known member. So what's the cost of losing Robert Kilroy-Silk?
He came, he saw, he failed to conquer, and he's gone. And as a result of it, we have a UK IP that has never been more united.
But the divorce will mean fiercer competition for votes in an election where Europe is not the sole issue. Jonathan Beale, BBC News, Westminster.
During this election campaign, the 10 o'clock news has invited a wide range of people across the UK to share their views on the issues that matter to them. We're hoping they'll give viewers a new perspective on some familiar issues. Tonight, the Paralympic gold medalist Tanni Gray-Thompson tells us what she thinks about sport in schools.
I'm Tanni Gray-Thompson and I'm a Paralympic gold medalist. Not everyone can be a Paralympic champion, but for me one of the most crucial things is that both disabled and non-disabled young people get really good access to physical exercise. I just get really worried that you see so many kids around now who are fat, who aren't fit, who are maybe struggling with their studies. And sport's not the answer to everything, but being physically active changes a lot of those things. I'm going to Lawrence Jackson School in Gisborough this morning, which is quite close to where I live, to launch a campaign called Moving Forward. And it's an initiative about increasing people's awareness of health. It just makes complete sense to me that sport and physical activity has a really high priority on any government's agenda. I think it's really easy to think that children don't want to do sport, that they just want to spend all their time on computers. But actually, when you see them at an initiative like this, you know, they actually want to try lots of things. Parents actually need to kind of be really aware of the opportunities they can give their children by making sure that they do stuff outside school as well.
I used to do like netball, but now I just like do sports and PE though.
And you know, today the girls I was talking to were really aware of what was a good diet and what was a bad diet, which was fantastic. But then it's actually putting that into practice.
I think it's a combination. The fact that we live in a society that we're worried to let our kids, you know, out after dark. It's the fact that sort of physical activity is being taken out of our everyday life. When they go home, it's right, just watch TV or go play on the computer. It's kind of the environment that we've started to focus on. It's a little bit Americanised.
Well done, 10.
You look at what's happening in other European countries, and you know, sport is very high up the political agenda, and it's not just Olympic and Paralympic sport that's high up the agenda, it's sport for all ages. What I'd like to see is young people get at least half an hour of physical activity in school every day, and if there's a cost to that, I think the nation needs to pay it.
Why?
For my daughter, you know, I don't care when she grows up if she doesn't want to be an athlete or she doesn't want to be involved in competitive sport. What I care about is that she's fit and that she's healthy and she's able to live the life that she wants. And what really worries me as a parent is that by not giving good access to lots of physical activity now, we're just building up problems for the future.
And digital viewers can find more on the election in 10 o'clock News Extra, including a special report on Charles Kennedy's campaign day. UEFA has ordered Inter Milan to play their next 4 European matches behind closed doors after the violence in their Champions League game against their neighbours AC Milan. Inter's Newsnight's getting underway over on BBC Two. We'll be back a little later with the latest on the day's headlines. But now it's time to join our news teams across the UK. Bye for now.
Good evening from BBC London News. I'm Matt Barbette. It was 60 years ago today that the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp was liberated. And over this weekend, survivors are gathering there for ceremonies of remembrance. Some Londoners, though, who lived through the horrors have been left out. And as Sarah Harris reports, they're upset that they can't share the moment.
John Fransman had hoped to travel to Belsen, where he'd suffered and survived as a young child. Instead, he watched those who suffered with him on television at his home in St John's Wood. After being taken to the camp, he was never to see his father again. He was exterminated by the Nazis on account of his faith. John waited for an official invitation to mourn in Germany, but it never came.
There's not that many that they could have found the funds, I think. Basically, I'm disgusted by the response that I've heard that we've received. I think it's a very poor show.
In Hyde Park, candles and prayers this morning to mark the 60th anniversary of the liberation. Rudy Oppenheimer from Primrose Hill works tirelessly to keep the memory of the Holocaust alive. His invitation to the service of remembrance at Belsen only arrived with hours to spare.
Tickets were very late, but I got mine yesterday by messenger, I suppose. But again, I wasn't at home because I talk at schools just about every day, and yesterday was no exception. So when I got home at 8 o'clock, the tickets were there.
The German government department responsible for financing the commemorations at Belsen said that funding was limited to Western European survivors who'd actively supported the memorial there. It would be generous for a government to pay for all the survivors of Belsen to travel to join the service of remembrance. But for many, this could be the last chance to mark such a big anniversary and together mourn. Sarah Harris, BBC London News.
London's parents have it tough. Good childcare is hard to come by and expensive. On average, 25% more expensive than the rest of the country. Well, today the Chancellor Gordon Brown spelt out what Labour had done and would do to help, while the other parties said they would be best for families. Our political editor Tim Donovan has tonight's London File.
Labour's loitering with a new pitch to parents.
It's the Schoolgate election.
The Schoolgate election.
Schoolgate.
Claire Lassman's a Schoolgate and a sandpit mum. She's got a 9-year-old as well as her 2-year-old here and thinks she's well placed to judge whether Labour's delivered.
I've seen over the years, not just in school, but also in terms of maternity leave and so on, getting much, much better as they've got older.
Children are 20% of the population, 100% of the future, said the Chancellor today. Labour's goal is 12 months paid maternity leave by 2009, 20 hours of free nursery schooling for all 3- and 4-year-olds, and child tax credits to rise in line with earnings till 2008, helping people with income up to £59,000.
The choice Britain faces this year is not simply one for election day. It is a choice about the character of our country for the next generation and beyond.
Labour pioneered Sure Start, centres not just of childcare but of health and training advice for parents. Labour promises many more such centres, but with limited money, will it mean quantity at the expense of quality? The Conservatives say they would provide the greater flexibility that parents want, more maternity pay over 6 months or the same amount as now for 9 months. And they're offering £50 a week for people wanting to use childcare from family or friends.
What parents want is not more talk from Mr Blair or Mr Brown. They want flexible, affordable childcare. That's why the Conservative Party will introduce a new flexible childcare payment.
The Liberal Democrats promised maternity pay of £170 a week for first-time mothers for 6 months. They'd provide 3,500 more early years centres and scrap the £250 Child Trust Fund, the Chancellor's so-called baby bond.
We've had to make tough choices, and we are putting some money into helping with maternity, additional cash provision, but it's a very carefully targeted and costed initiative.
I'll just ask you about Sure Start, Chancellor. No chance to talk more details today, but the Chancellor and his opponents know they need to appeal to voters through their children. Tim Donovan, BBC London News.
Now, if you want to know if the political wind is going to change in favour of one of the big 3 parties, look no further than Watford. Only twice since 1945 has it failed to elect an MP from the winning party. So what do the voters there make of the campaign so far? Carl Mercer has been finding out.
It's a town famed for its hornets, for its harlequins, and for the next 3 weeks or so for its hoardings. There is, after all, an election just round the corner. And on the surface at least, Watford seems like any other town. A busy high street, a busier shopping centre, but lurking beneath the surface, do people here have a darker political secret? On all but 2 occasions since the war, they've elected an MP from the winning side. Why, we asked.
I suppose it's just that you've got a cross-section of the population here. You've got some quite wealthy people in certain parts of the borough, and certainly poor people in other parts.
There you have it, and good reasons why all 3 main parties see this as a weather vane constituency. Labour hold the seat now. They took it from the Tories in 1997, but the Lib Dems have taken over the local council.
And if you're asking people who's going up and who's going down in the political world, where better to do it than in the lift.
Off we went then, armed with the main party's campaign slogans.
Whose slogan would be Britain forward, not back?
You picked the wrong person. I'm not into politics at all.
I came up to you and said, are you thinking what we're thinking? What would you say?
Probably not.
Although, was not lost.
If I said to you the real alternative, would that mean anything?
Yeah, Liberal Democrats.
Are you thinking what we're thinking?
Conservative Party.
And what's the Labour slogan?
Forward, not back.
Where else would you get that but Watford? By midnight on May the 5th, this weather vane town will have delivered its verdict on more than just the slogans. Carl Mercer, BBC London News.
So keep a close eye on Watford. 4 candidates have said they're standing there so far. The names are on your screen right now. A busy weekend of sport in London with the marathon taking place on Sunday. But first, though, not 1 but 2 teams from Arsenal have had cup ties to think about, as Garrett Hughes reports.
Arsenal ladies are blazing a trail in Europe. This evening they face Swedish champions Djurgårdens for a place in the UEFA Cup final. Get in! 8 days ago in the first leg, it ended 1-1 in Stockholm.
I think, yeah, they are the favourites and they're considered a very strong team, but I think we've done very well. We went there with confidence that we could get a draw, and if you'd had asked us before the game, if to take away a draw with an away goal, then we would have been very pleased, and we are.
Should Arsenal get the better of the Swedes tonight, they'll become the first British ladies side to reach a European final.
We can play when we want to play. We went out there defensively minded just to get a result. That's what we've done. That's part one of the game, and we just can't wait for part two.
We know how big this game is and how huge it is for the club, and it's probably one of the biggest games we'll ever play in.
Now for the men, a different scenario, a chance to salvage some silverware to get their name on the FA Cup.
It is a semi-final of a cup, of course it's a big game, but any game is big for us because we never envisage to go a little bit easier into any game. But the values we have at the club is just we do not even look what competition we play, we want to win the game.
A problem for Arsenal though, their most potent weapon will be missing, injured and most definitely missed.
It's a big blow, yes, of course. You want your Thierry Henry with us, but on the other hand, we have to focus now on the strengths we have tomorrow.
And if Henry's absence isn't enough, Sol Campbell also won't play. His recovery from injury not complete. So Arsenal minus two of their biggest stars. They should be bright enough to win tomorrow though. Geraint Hughes, BBC London News.
And we've just heard that Arsenal ladies were beaten 1-0, I'm afraid, which means they're now out of the cup. Bad luck to them. Let's take a quick look at the weather now. And tonight the rain is going to clear, leaving dry spells. Fog will form though, and the temperature will drop to around 3 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow should start with some mist about, but a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers will develop. The top temperature 15 degrees. For the marathon, Sunday is expected to be dry, but rain will spread east later on. Well, that's it from everyone on the Late Team. Do have a great weekend. Now it's time to go back to Fiona Bruce with the national and international headlines. Good night.
And the main news tonight, more than 5,000 workers are to be made redundant at MG Rover. Many more jobs in subsidiary industries are under threat. The government's announced a £150 million support package for the workers at Longbridge. And Michael Howard has accused Tony Blair of failing to protect the postal voting system from potential fraud. And from all of us on the 10 o'clock team, good night.
The police will be there as
I
soon
need
as
to know in
possible.
which way he attacked
With
you.
their air weapons. Stay on the line.
Is crime falling? Or is it out of control? Panorama investigates Cops and Robbers, Sunday at 10:20 on BBC One.
Hello there. It's been quite a cold day for many of us today. Should be a bit warmer though for tomorrow. There will be some more rain around though during this weekend. Now we've seen plenty of rain today. We've had some heavy and thundery showers across southern England. Those have faded away, and all the actions further north from the North Midlands into Wales, northern England and parts of Scotland. It's quite wet at the moment, particularly so for northeast England. It's very windy here as well. Very miserable weather. The rain at its heaviest for the next couple of hours. We may well see some snow over the hills perhaps, and even at some lower levels for a time across parts of Scotland. The rain beginning to ease off a touch as it just noses its way towards the Irish Sea later in the night. That means many southern and eastern areas will become drier, and a few breaks in the cloud will lead to some pockets of mist and fog. That could linger into tomorrow morning. Here temperatures may just be low enough for a touch of ground frost, but the lowest numbers tonight ahead of the wet weather across the far northwest of Scotland and particularly Northern Ireland. Could be a touch of frost here. So for tomorrow, many of us starting off pretty cold and with a lot of cloud around as well. There'll still be some wet weather left over from overnight, but really as it just trickles its way in through Scotland and perhaps the eastern side of Northern Ireland, the rain should tend to peter out gradually through the day. And we should also begin to see an improvement slowly but surely across Northern England and across Wales. Still a lot of cloud around. Further south, following that mist and fog, every chance of seeing a bit of sunshine from time to time. That could trigger off one or two showers. Nothing like to the same extent that we're seeing during today, and many places will have a dry and pretty cloudy day, I suspect. Now today was certainly cold. Here's a selection of temperatures. Only 5 degrees in Newcastle. Newcastle, just scraped 10 degrees in London. All those temperatures will be higher for tomorrow. It should feel warmer across many parts of the country, perhaps 15 degrees in London if we're lucky. Not so across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, where we keep a lot of cloud and it stays a little bit damp as well. Should be fine and dry though, I suspect, at Twickenham for the rugby final between Leeds and Bath. Live coverage on Grandstand BBC One. Should be dry also at the Millennium Stadium on Saturday, but not so on Sunday. We've got some weather fronts coming in from off the Atlantic. They're heading across from the west, slowly but surely. It'll be western areas that see most of the rain on Sunday. So for the London Marathon, getting off to a cold start. Most people should finish dry. Chance of rain later, particularly for the stragglers. And many eastern parts of England in particular dry on Sunday. Rain gathering in the west, but taking all day really, I think, to head its way towards the east coast. The wind strengthening and wet for the beginning next week. Good night.
Do you like Nicole Kidman? Good.
A pint of bitter and a packet of plain crisps, please.
That's why on the Politics Show we tell the whole story, from the politics in the news to the breaking stories you haven't read about yet. We'll bring you a local and a national perspective. From Downing Street to your street. A pint, please.
Both these people have been training for over 6 months. Both will push their bodies to the limit for 26 miles, and both will take 2 weeks to fully recover. But that's where the similarity ends. The 25th London Marathon. Looks fun, actually serious. Sunday morning from 8:45 on BBC One and Radio 5 Live.
Do you see the world differently? Because we're looking for filmmakers and animators for BBC Three.
The BAFTA TV Awards.
Oh, stunning place. Just like Vegas. Fill me up, Doris.
A night of stars.
Never so excited.
Celebrating the best in the business.
You weren't half bad.
Join Graham Norton Sunday at 8 on BBC One.
You're sure a hot ticket.
Battling the aliens of London. Doctor Who. 7 o'clock tomorrow. BBC One.